Chapter 1, Implementing and Monitoring Business Strategy, Video 1. So if we turn now in our set of notes, we're now up to page, this is 1-1. And what we've got here is not only our chapter 1, but what I've included here is also chapter 2 as well. These are all of the models on a single page. Because what we need to understand is how we develop a strategic plan, how we come up with this long-term deliberate plan. In your exam, they won't tell you which model to use. If you're working, for instance, in corporate advisory, you already should know what is going to be the best model to define, analyze the problem, and then provide relevant advice, applying your knowledge to the scenario. So what we need to understand here is the important stages of our strategic plan. Because here's what we're trying to do. Here we are now, this is where we are at the moment, and what this strategic plan is trying to do, it's trying to give us some kind of future direction. It's trying to help us think about where we want to go. So it's trying to come up here with some future direction, or if I put OBJ, future objectives. It's trying to give us some kind of purpose, where we want to go. Well, how do we know where we want to go? Well, we do it through 3 stages. So first of all, stage 1. This is first of all analysing our position. So this is where we are. Where do we want to go? Once we've then determined where it is we want to go, we then start coming up with decision choices, methods of getting us to where we want to go. And then once we've made those decision choices, the final 3rd stage is that implementing those choices. So this is putting into action and control. Well, let's first we'll go back here to this first stage. This is our position analysis. And one of the most popular ways of analysing the position is through what's known as a corporate appraisal. What's that? You will know, you've come across it before, a SWOT analysis. But what students sometimes don't understand is this. There is a difference between strengths and opportunities and weaknesses and threats. And often when they examine SWOT, students get this wrong. Strengths and weaknesses are something we can control. They are internal to the business. So when we're identifying strengths and weaknesses, we are studying the organization. There's lots of models here that can help us to study the internal organization. Looking at the mission statements, 9M's model, value chain activities, POPIT, as well as also looking at the way we've structured the organization. Are we centralized with lots of head office control, or are we decentralized with lots of various strategic business units? Not only thinking internally, but what's maybe more important is what's happening externally. So when we start thinking here about the opportunities and the threats, this is the models here we can be using. Macro model looks at Pesto. We've got the industry model. This is looking at the 5+1 competitive forces. Because in deciding a direction, we are trying to build on those strengths. You won't want to expand in an area where you have weaknesses, and also expanding where we see opportunities, trying to avoid threats. So political threats or economic threats, or maybe even in the industry, there could be threats of new entrants. Barriers could help to protect that. There's going to be always competitive rivalry, power of suppliers, power of customers. These are all the important models we need to know before the actual exam. That's our corporate appraisal. We're also thinking about our product position. So we're thinking about the product life cycle. Where are we in terms of the life cycle? And a related model here is the BCG, which looks at also stages as we move through in a product's life. And finally, if we put all of this together, along with our analysis of the competition, we must never forget the competition, we can come up with critical success factors. What are those? Those are important factors we need to achieve a successful strategy. If we think, for instance, about an airline, what's going to be important for success in an airline? You could think maybe the operations, that's important, the service quality, the staff that we employ. You could think about maybe the technology, the website, the ticketing, the promotions. Safety would be very, very important, because without a good safety record, if you have an accident, of course, everything else is going to be damaged. So these are what's known as critical success factors, factors important getting us to where we want to go. All of this first stage here, it's giving us this. It's allowing us to think about, where do we want to go? Where's the future direction? Then we need to start thinking about ways of getting us to where we want to go. These are our strategic decision choices. We come up with a range of methods, of ways of getting us to where we want to go, and then we analyze them. Are they suitable? Are they acceptable? Are they feasible? This is what we're going to be doing a lot of in chapter 2. But let's think about some of the choices that we have. So for instance, we need to start thinking about how to compete. We have models here. Porter's generic strategies model. He says that we can compete and gain a competitive advantage by either being a cost leader or a differentiator, or focusing our resources on niche markets. Where to compete? We can start thinking about growth strategies. Another good model here is the Ansoff's matrix. This looks at developing new products, developing new markets, and the product to market mix. And we could also start thinking about methods as well. So if we think about, for instance, developing an online business, you can do that yourself. That would be through an organic growth project. We'll look at those in chapter 9. It requires a lot of time. Doing it yourself internally, you need to, if it's online business, we'd need to recruit staff. We need to invest in hardware, software. That takes time. We would make mistakes. So as an alternative method, we can expand through mergers and acquisitions. Chapter 11 is a popular chapter because for many companies, rather than doing it themselves internally, buying a business is much, much faster. It's much, much quicker immediately. We can start to sell, we can start to distribute. So these are external methods. And there's other methods as well. We have various strategic alliances here, joint ventures, franchising, license agreements. We'll look more at these. These are covered in our chapter 2. And then finally, once we've chosen then our direction, the method we want, we then need to implement and put that into action. So this is our final third stage, putting the plan now into action by considering various areas here. We've got the 7S model looking at structures. We need to consider business processes, information systems to help us achieve what we want to achieve. We've got project management, people very important, finance, marketing, etc., etc. We've got change management in chapter 2 as well. Then a little bit later on, how we measure and monitor. Once we've implemented, we need data. We can gather that through the 7 V's. We need to start thinking about strategic control measures and balanced scorecard, looking at financial, non-financial results. That's covered later on in our chapter 8. So each of these areas, we need to understand how one relates to the other, but also selecting the correct model. Is it about direction? Is it about evaluating different choices? Or we made the choice, do we want to implement? Let's get into a little bit more detail into our chapter 1. So here you will see we've got our strategic plan. Strategic planning, I'll just put some of the more basic points about strategists here. In your exam, when we start thinking about a strategic plan, it's also known as long-term planning or putting together a business strategy, and it considers various things. The long-term, the whole organization gives us direction. There's some advantages of doing it, force us to look ahead. It means we get a better fit with the environment, but there's also some disadvantages as well. It can be time consuming. If the environment is rapidly changing, that can give us problems. We might ignore short-term opportunities. So having a long-term plan, it may constrain, it may restrict freedom and actions. We also need to start being aware of the different levels of strategy. So in the exam, be aware of these terms. If the examiner is talking about a business strategy or a strategic plan, he's wanting you to start considering what is the long-term general direction of the whole organization. This is what Chapter 1, first of all, is giving us. It's giving us this long-term direction. And there it is again. We saw in the introduction, we talked about these levels of strategy. So at the bottom, we have functional operational plans. These are short term. And in the middle, we have tactical or business plans. These are looking at how we're going to achieve our long-term strategic plan, how in the medium term we should structure the organization. We should have, for instance, strategic business units tackling particular markets. We've got mission statements. So again, just be aware of what mission statements are and what they would cover. Mission statements outline the primary purpose of the organization. It's the first objective from which all others are set. And a mission statement would involve things like this: the vision, the purpose, so what we're trying to achieve, what the organization does, the strategy, so how we achieve that purpose, the values, the beliefs, innovation, or maybe some ethical beliefs, environmental, social governance, stakeholders, and how we meet our various stakeholder needs. Shareholders, we should always be aware, are the most important. They are the owners of the business, and the primary objective is always maximizing their wealth. There's many other stakeholders, investors, customers, suppliers. And putting together here a mission statement, it gives lots of advantages, sets a direction, helps us formulate strategic plans, helps resolve conflicts between different stakeholder groups, helps us communicate the purpose, the values, and it can also help marketing as well. It's got some disadvantages, so again, it's not all good news whenever we're talking about these strategic areas. We also need to be aware we've got primary groups of stakeholders, many different types of stakeholders here. Capital market stakeholders would be shareholders, investors and banks. There's product market stakeholders, there's organizational stakeholders. A stakeholder is basically anybody that is affected by the organization. Now, we need to make sure that when we start thinking about our strategic plans, that we are aware of the powerful key stakeholders. Who are they? What do they want? Because if we are putting together here a strategic plan, you saw in one of the models here, acceptability. If we have a key powerful stakeholder that finds that our plan is unacceptable, you will find it very, very difficult to put that plan into action. So that's our mission, our objectives, and our stakeholders. Let's now move on. Let's start getting into our first key important area. And here now, you will start to see questions being tested. So in my set of notes here, you will see when an area is being tested, I flag it up with the date, the section it was tested, and the amount of marks that they gave it for. And what we're going to do is the same as we talked about earlier when we introduced here our big picture of all of our strategic models. So what we're going to do to get through the syllabus is we're going to break this up. First, we're going to start with our strategic position, our analysis models, and then we're going to do questions. We're then going to move on. The second stage is our decision choices. We'll do questions. And then the third stage, implementation. Again, we'll do questions. So by the time we get to the end of this, you will be able to spot the models. You'll be able to spot the important areas, the important considerations. Then all we need to do is apply this to the scenario. So let's start off here first of all with our strategic position analysis. We're thinking about things like strategic capabilities, so the resources, the people, the money, but also things like the competences, the skills, the abilities. These are often summarized as strengths and weaknesses. We can't ignore what's happening outside externally. There's the environment. These are often the opportunities and the threats. So one model here, a very important model, not been tested for some time, is our SWOT analysis. This can be used on its own, but it can also introduce other models as well we can use to help us identify the SWOT. Strengths and weaknesses we mentioned earlier are internal. They look at things like resources, capabilities. Opportunities and threats are external. And let's be absolutely clear what we mean by internal and external. Strengths and weaknesses are internal because they are things that we can control. They are things like the resources, the capabilities, what are we good at, what are we poor at doing. In your exam, often it's very easy to identify the strengths and the weaknesses. But in the real world, we don't get given a case study. In the real world, it's other models that can help us think about strengths and weaknesses. So look, you can see that here there are more detailed models trying to help us to analyze the internal factors. So 9M's, Porter's value chain, and Poppet. Here, for instance, is the internal analysis model's 9M's. If we was thinking about a SWOT analysis of Kaplan, we could start going through this 9M's resource, and this would give us ideas about how good the business is, the strengths, the weaknesses. So you were listening through our website here, recorded. Hopefully it's clear. Hopefully you can hear me. The screen's clear. Machinery is quite good. Yeah. The makeup, this is looking at things like the patents, the branding, the marketing. We're all good at that here at Kaplan. I think we pretty much dominate the market here. Certainly Big Four. I have the monopoly here. So look, what we're doing is we're going through lots of resources, thinking about what's good, thinking about what is bad. This is what the models do. I want you to see the models as your friends. The models give you answers, provide you with advice. This is what they're helping you to structure and helping you to do. What I want you to do before the exam is have a read through all of these models. I'm not me reading, every word, every paragraph. This is something I want you guys to do. What I want to do is spend more time on question practice. But here this one's looking, you can see at resources. So if they're a hint about a resource, this will be a good model here to be using to evaluate the resources. Let's move on. Not only do we have internal models, there are external models. And when we start thinking here about external factors, we mean factors we cannot control. They are uncontrollable. So what will affect the organization? What sort of economic changes could give us problems? What new technologies could be useful? Are new entrants going to be entering the marketplace? Again, if we are doing this in the real world, we need models helping us generate ideas. And of course, the best models to analyze the external factors are Pestel and Five Forces. It again is in greater detail later in my set of notes. Before we start thinking about the external models, let's first start with the internal analysis models. As we've already seen, we've got the 9M's resource audit model just there. We've got our Porter's value chain. Let's move on. So again, look, you can see these models here have been tested. This one more recently, December 21, a large 15-mark question. What does Porter's value chain do? Well, it helps us to identify which activities create value and contribute towards something known as competitive advantage. What's that? Well, competitive advantage we're going to be looking at, this is going to be further when we get into Porter's generics. But let's introduce this competitive advantage now. This is looking at two ways a business can compete. So you can compete on differentiation. That means that you are aiming your products with high quality and charging premium prices. Or you can aim at the low end of the market. This is through what's known as cost leadership. Here, you're aiming to keep your costs low because what you're trying to do is charge low prices and compete on value for money, low price. How do we achieve these competitive advantages? Well, what we need to do is go for activities and look to see how we can create these values. So this value chain breaks down the firm into 5 primary, and we have 4 support activities. So if we look here at the primary activities, you'll see the model, the way it's set up, it's like an arrow. And so what we have here is our primary activities, inbound operations, outbound. And what I'm doing is explaining all of these activities and giving some examples as well. So inbound, for instance, is looking at how we receive, how we store, how we handle raw materials. This would be from our suppliers. So if we had, for instance, a just-in-time stock system, that could give us a cost advantage. We've got operations, transferring the raw material into finished goods and services. If we use, for instance, skilled craftsmen, this could give us a quality advantage. So we have primary activities. We then have support activities. So each of these primary activities is all supported by things such as the firm infrastructure, how we structure the organization, the staff we have, the human resources, the technology we use, and then where we locate. Procurement of things like head office, the warehouse, distribution. So all of this we're thinking about with all of these support activities, or sometimes called secondary activities. So we're going to see questions on this. All the important questions, I've got them later in my set of notes. We need to be able to spot when we're going to be using each of these. Let's continue on. We've got another quite popular model here. This one's known as the product life cycle model. You can see this one's been tested quite a few times in the past exams. And the first thing to note is this isn't only talking about the life cycle of products, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Series X. Be aware this model can also be used to look at the life of types of products, for instance, OLED televisions. You can use it for markets. You can also use it for whole industries as well. And what this one says is that all products, markets, and industries go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different stages. So first of all, we have what's known as a development stage. This is where we're researching, we're developing. Often it requires lots of cash, lots of money. So it's where we are losing money. But hopefully researching, we're developing an idea that can be put into introduction. So here we can start to increase our sales revenue. But normally at these very early stages, it requires lots of heavy marketing, discounting, promoting. So it's not a famous product just yet. So all of this, again, still further costs money. But hopefully what we're doing is we're moving towards break even. So look, you can see just here in this little diagram, we've got an important part just here. So this is where we are thinking now about getting our money back. Breaking even is an important part. We're going to be talking about internal projects and things like IRRs, internal rates of return, getting our money back. And this happens just here between introduction and growth. So look, you can see here now, our sales now are really starting to take off. And it means that before, where we were losing money, losing cash, now we are making profits. You can see now, look, we're now in the black. Our profits are now being made. But it's at the maturity stage. This is where we've got now very famous products. We don't need to market. We don't need to promote. We can now make a lot of money at this maturity stage. So here, look, you can see the amount of share of profits there, very, very high. Then finally, the product lifecycle model says that eventually all products will enter decline. You can see here the sales revenue is going down. We have got a reduction here in the profits. This is our decline. Now, again, what I want you guys to be doing here is not just thinking about the 5 stages. Think about the strategy at each one of these stages. So, for instance, at the development stage, we need to be quick at introducing our products. The longer this takes, the greater money involved, the slower we're going to be entering. Maybe competitors could be entering the market before us. So in this development stage, we need to monitor, we need to control things like the design, development costs, we need to set up targets and budgets. We're trying to avoid overrunning in terms of things like times and costs. Also at the early stage, we're thinking about our marketing strategies. So you can be asked to apply these models to a specific scenario. Again, I've got questions later on that we're going to be going through and practicing, but I want you before the actual exam to read and be familiar with all of these models. The product lifecycle model, in some ways, product lifecycle, it's related to the BCG. Let's have a look here at the BCG on the next page. So this model here, it's never been tested. You guys could be the first ones to get a question on the BCG. Look, you can see no questions just here. What does this one do? Well, this helps us classify businesses, divisions and products according to the market share and the future growth. So BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, they said growth is seen as the best measure of market attractiveness and market share. This is a good indicator of competitive strength. And they said, look, when we first introduce a product, so when we first introduce it into the marketplace, we begin with very low market share. The reason we've developed the product is because it's an area that's growing, but it's a question mark. We're not sure where it's going to go. If we can increase the market share, we can turn it into a star. Or if the rate of growth in the market falls, it can become a dog. So we're not sure where it's going to go. Dogs generally are undesirable. We don't want dogs. Hopefully, we can turn the question mark into a star by increasing the market share. Stars are good products to have, good divisions, good businesses, because now we've got a high market share in a high growing marketplace. But eventually, product life cycle says the rate of growth will drop down, and what we'll have is a cash cow. So that market growth will drop, but a cash cow, it's the same as what we've talked about earlier with the product life cycle. Here, we are generating lots and lots of cash. In the BCG matrix, they talk about cash cows before finally maybe a reduction in market share and once again becoming dogs. Again, just have a little read through. I put some notes together here on each of these quadrants. Cash cows, stars, question marks and dogs. The dog is a product in a low market share, low growth. These tend to have negative cash flow and likely to continue. So where we have these types of products, businesses or divisions, we shouldn't be having them. The conclusion of BCG is this. What we require is a balanced portfolio. We don't want all the products as cash cows. We don't want all the products as stars, but we want a balance. Some cash cows, some stars, maybe some question marks, some new products, have a reasonable prospect of becoming future stars, and no dogs. There'd have to be good reasons if we're keeping a dog within our portfolio. We've also got here another model that has never been tested. That's our Poppet pyramid model. This one talks about there being 4 interconnected elements that need to be integrated to achieve successful business systems. So if we are going to be successful at conducting and carrying out the organisation strategic plan, these 4 important elements, they all need to be integrated and linked to one another. How we structure the organisation, the people we use, the skills, the abilities, the processes that we use, and of course, technologies in the middle. It ties together all of these important elements. I've put down here, look, you see people having the right skills, the right motivation, training, the way we organise, whether we structure the organisation, the processes used, and the IT. Some of these areas we're going to be getting into further and expanding into. You'll see in the implementation parts, we've got things like human resources, we're going to be talking about information systems, and people is also an important part of our strategic changes. So in chapter 2, we're going to start talking about implementing these changes. So whenever we want to put into action our plans, people are an important part of that. Finally, we've got our key or critical success factors. Many years ago, we had a question on it. These are simply performance requirements that are fundamental to the organization's success. In the context of critical success factors, they can be viewed as product features that are valued by the customer. So I gave a little example earlier of an airline business. Safety is a big one there. There's many other industries that I'm giving examples on. Automobiles, maybe the styling, that's what's going to attract people to the cars. Then distributing them, selling them, we want an efficient dealer network, how we organise and how we assess performance. Many different industries, different ideas down there for how we assess all of that. Let's move on. We've then got our external models. And again, this is what I mentioned earlier. We need to spot when to use these external analysis models. Generally, they won't ask us to use the Pestel model. We need to look for hints or tips. So are they asking us about a macro analysis? If they are, Pestel model. Are they asking us about an environmental analysis? Again, if they are, we should be using Pestel analysis. I'm not going to read all the way through this, but political factors is things like the addition or the removal of regulatory constraints. These can give us problems, major strategic threats. They can also provide opportunities. It all depends. We're thinking about maybe what changes in regulations are possible, what will be the impact, maybe what tax or government incentives will be deployed, how could that affect our strategy. So these are just general points that I'm listing down just here. As I mentioned earlier, in the exam, you need to use the specific exam scenario and the important facts and issues. I'm sure you guys have come across Pestel before. Let's move on. Our last model here is our Porter's 5 forces. Again, we need to spot this in the actual exam. So if the examiner is asking you to analyze the competitive environment will be 5 forces, or if they're asking you for an industry analysis, again, this Porter's 5 forces is the best model. It looks at things at threats of new competitors coming in, threats of new entrants. It looks at things like threats of substitute products. It looks at the power of customers, the power of suppliers, the rivalry and the intensity of rivalry within the industry. And it can also be expanded for a 6th force. That can be complementers and public interest. Complementers are products or services that an organisation makes the product more competitive. So often people will say, I prefer Apple smartphones because of the app. apps that they have in the iStore. So that would be a complementer that gives greater maybe success for those particular products. Public interest is pressure coming from the public, pressure groups, lobbyists, trends. These can affect some industries more than others. So if we're in a chemical, pharmaceutical industry or tobacco or nuclear power, there can be lots of pressure coming from, and those can be giving us industry pressures. Okay, that's enough. I'll leave those for you guys to read. The point is you need to read before the actual exam. Don't walk into the exam thinking open book, you'll have time. You don't have time. You need to spend more time answering. What I now want to start getting into and spending more time on is question practice. So let's start off here with the December 2022 exam. And like I mentioned, we are going to be extracting and won't be covering all the information from each case. What I want to do much more efficiently and much more effectively, I want to be going through each area and extracting the important points of each of these areas. Now, in our introduction, we talked about case study technique. So here's what I want you to do in your exam. The minute you open up your exam page, don't look at the requirements. First, look to see what is the scenario. So let's do that just here. We've got a company here called Successful Restaurant Group, SRG. What do? We're told they're operating a few reputable Chinese restaurants. This is in Hong Kong for years. It's well known for its dine-in Chinese cuisines that offer high-quality dishes. It says for customers that are willing to pay premium prices for luxurious dining experiences. So fine, we've read the introduction. We can now picture the business. Then we need to read the requirements. So again, what I've done here is I've extracted. This is question 1 for 10 marks. Let's have a little read through this. It says, as the pandemic has changed the business environment for SRG, the board of directors want to understand the changes and impacts. So hold on, this is an important stakeholder. The board of directors, they want to understand the changes and impacts of environmental factors on the business in the short and long term. Full stop. Let's carry on reading. It says, acting as CFO and certified accountant, you are asked to apply the most suitable strategic model to conduct a business environment analysis and report the findings to the board of directors. Now remember what the board of directors are concerned about. They are concerned about the changes and the impacts in the short term and the long term. So when we start putting together here the findings to the board, we need to make sure we're providing them with short term, what's happening now, and longer term, what's going to be happening maybe several years ahead in the future. Notice here, they've said apply the most suitable strategic model. Now, first thing, let's first of all go back to our verbs. In the introduction, I said to you guys, just pay attention to some of the verbs here. I'm only going to do this a few times. Let's go back to our little introduction and our verbs, and you'll find that here, this verb apply, it's a level 2 requirement. So this is intermediate. Here it is. It's on page 7 of our introduction apply. So what we need to do is we need to demonstrate knowledge, concepts, or a technique to resolve or give some kind of advice for scenarios, straightforward scenarios or problems. So a concept or a technique, an established method. Well, they want us to use a suitable model here. Now, to get the suitable model, and they've done this many, many times, here's what you guys need to do. first thing you need to do is look to see, is there any hint or is there any tip in the requirement? So the hint, the tip here is that business environment analysis. So we should know by going back to our models, if we go back here, back to our PESTEL, look, here it is. Look for environment analysis. This is business environment analysis. They want us to conduct an external analysis. So it looks like PESTEL will be the best model here to apply. But here's what you need to look at second of all. So let's put an A first, and then let's put a B second of all. As you start reading in detail the case scenario, it should be obvious that that would be a good model to use. So the examiner should be putting in here things in the scenario, good things that we can be using here, things like facts, issues that we can apply. Let's have a little look. For instance, what they talk about is that this company has only got a simple website. So this would be here technology. Let's carry on reading. It says, despite strong growth over the years, revenue and profitability have dropped in the last year because the government has imposed stringent rules on customers and dining in hours. This is due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this would be, you can see here, political. If we start thinking about short term, you can see the problems here. The number of dine-in customers, this has all been restricted through the government. So in the short term, that's going to give us problems with things like cash flow, revenue, and profitability. Longer term, if the rules are even more stringent, it could even mean the business having to close down. We might have to stop providing dining services. Let's also think about the long term. Maybe this pandemic's not going to last forever and ever and ever, though. So at some point, surely, we will return to dining in. What they was giving you here was government actions that are bad, the stringent rules. They were also giving you here the positive side to government action. So at the bottom here, they were talking about the government providing additional subsidies that we had down just here. So this will be good in the short term. It'll help cover costs. It'll help us to continue the business. Of course, though, once the pandemic is over, long term, those subsidies won't continue. So what I'm going to do here for 10 marks, let's first of all mention here that SRG should use the PESTEL analysis is to analyse the external business environment to help them understand and identify the opportunities and the threats in the short and long term. And then what I'm then doing is I'm then going through each of these areas using the arguments that we talked about earlier on. So look, the government has imposed stringent rules, restricting customers' dine-in times. This will affect the revenue of SRG restaurants in the short term. On the other hand, the government's provided subsidies for the restaurants. What's good about the subsidies is this will help support the business in the short term. However, we've got to be careful. There could be threats in the future. If the government was to strengthen the regulations or if the government was to reduce subsidies available, this could threaten the restaurant in the long term. But we think, however, these regulations, the pandemic's not going to last forever and ever and ever. So this is unlikely to be enforced forever and ever. Surely at some point it'll be loosened or removed. So in the long term, there should be opportunities. Maybe we're writing a little bit too much here. 10 marks. What the examiner's trying to communicate to you is, as a minimum, they want 10 short paragraphs. Using information, explain the point from the case scenario. I always tell my students, don't just write 10. Try and write more, because markers may not give you a mark for every paragraph you write. So if you have time, please try and write more. Maybe 12 or 14 paragraphs. The more you can write, the better the structure you've got, the greater the marks you're going to be receiving here, all applied to the scenario. And as a minimum, try and use the scenario. Look, I'm talking about the business here. SRG, we've got here SRG, here's SRG. So when the marker's marking, are we talking about the environment? Yeah. Are we talking about the business? Yeah. The stringent rules. Are we talking about long-term, short-term? Yes. We are doing all of that. So 2 things you're looking for. Any hints and tips in the requirement, and then as you are reading the scenario, you should find there are important facts and issues that can fit the model. Let's have a look. Let's carry on reading. Let's see what else we could have been using down just here. So if we carry on reading, it next says this. Surging unemployment and uncertain economic forecast have been affecting the spending behaviours of the customers. And what they're wanting to do is reduce spending on food and entertainment during the pandemic. So they're not buying food, they're not dining in. Instead, what they're doing is they are taking away. So this is all to do with spending and our economic problems here. So let's think about what we could be saying here. Well, here's the problem. In the short term, if people aren't spending, if people are not coming into the restaurant, that's going to give us a problem. Because look, we charge premium prices for high quality dining experiences. So in the short term, that would be a problem. But if people instead are taking away, maybe if we can change to providing takeaway meals, that could economically offset some of the lost revenue that we're losing from the dine-in. Maybe longer term, we need to start thinking about, is this going to be an economic long-term change? Maybe not. Maybe in the long term, people will come back once the economy recovers. People will come back and they will be prepared to pay for premium priced dining experiences. We're talking about short term, we're talking about long term. Again, we're talking about the external environment. Look, Pestel was all here. They talk about things like customer behaviors. So this would have been changes in social trends. They talk about restaurants have moved towards placing orders online. SRG restaurants, they've not done that. They focused on dine-in. So if they was to move to online, this is going to be involving technology. They talked here about regulations on food hygiene, air quality. This would have been here legal. And then finally, they talk about environmental interest groups. They've been complaining about all of the waste of the plastic. So we've got their environmental issues. What you should find is from your hint in the requirement, can we apply it to the scenario? If you are having difficulty applying the model, what I want you to do in the exam is stop. Have a little think, read the requirement again. Have you got the correct model? Because always the examiner, remember those 2 important things we talked about, the examiners work very hard to give you a scenario where there's things in it he's wanting you to pick out and put in and apply in your answer. I think we've done enough work there for our first part, chapter 1. So what I want to do in a second is take a little break, and then after a break time, we're going to do lots and lots more question practice. What I want to do is start off the question, give you guys the direction, and then leave you to practice. Like we said in the introduction, practice, practice, practice. That's what we need to be doing here. Developing these application skills, very, very important here for our module 12. You'll see in my solution here, I've got many points here. There's political just there. You can see on the next page just here, I've got economically. We could be talking about people spending less. That's a threat in the short term, but then there's this takeaway food. Maybe that could offset part of the lost revenue in the short term. In the long term, there could be a threat. If we continue with the takeaway business, the profit margins here, it's not going to be as good as the premium priced dine-in services. So economically, socially, technologically, you can see here I'm going through Pestel. You don't need this many points, and what you can always do here at the end is always provide a little conclusion as well. It's always worth a little extra mark at the end. So in conclusion, they should take prompt actions, develop the takeaway business, upgrade their technology to an online ordering system, and then this should ensure the survival in the longer term. Here's the examiner's comments. The December 2022 exam had the lowest pass rate, 16%. And you can see, although the candidates applied Pestel, here was the problem. The candidates were not able to identify and discuss those long-term and short-term factors. And even worse, some candidates copied materials from the learning pack. You can see government restrictions, pandemic, none of that is in the learning pack, none of that is in the notes. So don't copy. We need to read the requirement, look what they're asking us, answer directly, applying, using the scenario, specific facts and issues. That's what we need to do here in order to score marks and pass Module 12. I think what we'll do, I've written here, I think if you go through all these points, I think I've written many more points than 10 marks. You don't need as much, but the more you can write, if you've got time, the better. I think the best thing for us to do, let's take a short little break and then let's continue on. I've got many more questions in our part 2 video. So see you guys soon for part 2 where we'll continue. See you soon. Bye.